are in the website of the course. They're also showing up on the YouTube channel of Neve, of the Institute. And if you go into the YouTube channel and subscribe to it, then you will get a notice when the video is up. I think the video from the last class was up Thursday. We're going to make every effort to have the videos up by Thursday. They'll certainly be up by Sunday. But if you want to get it to have a notice so you know when it is, then subscribe to the YouTube channel. Your name is? Ravital had a question about the reading, which means that somebody's reading, which is always welcome. So we'll start with we'll always start with questions that are left over from the time before. Just so you remember, there's a place in the course where you can, there's a forum for students, and you can use that forum to raise questions while you're reading, while you're thinking. You're doing a lot of reading and thinking, I trust. So you can use the forum and raise things, and I will get a notice about it, and people should also, and then we can have that, some of it can be continued while we're between classes. So, yeah. Very tough. Just have to talk loud so I can hear you. Everybody else will hear you, but I won't. Yeah.
It's actually the reading from 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago.
The little man's one about him doing therapy with a dog phobia and everything. So I was wondering, since he was done with 10 sessions.
A little louder, what?
I'm saying he did a lot in 10 sessions, right? He got like the phobia of the dog over, them getting together. It looked like, the way that it seemed to me was like a control map. You know? Right. It was so controlling, even like there relaxes and now you're going to relax and let's do it, you know. And I'm just wondering, does it ever work like that in real life?
Right. So Ravital has a question which will bother you from now until the end of this course, which is family therapy about control? You know, if you read the J. Haley, that's the last chapter. It's an appendix to his very important book on family therapy. It sounds like the family comes in, and Haley takes them over. And he tells them what to do, and he's looking at the clock, and he's in a race with Sigmund Freud. You know, he's going to solve this problem of the phobia fast, clean, mean and clean, right? Is family therapy mean and clean? So that's a wonderful question, and the answer is, and part of what we're trying to work out in this course is, some families at some point, that's what they want, and that's what they need. And so the question will be, which families do you work with this way, and which families do you work with in other ways? And that will take us the first semester to figure out. Actually, we're working on that the whole year. Haley, like most of the innovators in family therapy, when they developed a way of thinking or working, the next thing they did is make one huge mistake and say it's good for everybody. Right? So any of the innovators in family therapy not only thought that they learned something from this family or that family, but they overgeneralized and said, if it works here, it works for everyone. Now that just isn't the case in any sort of therapy. One of the things we do when we become therapists is we say to ourselves, the person who's coming is coming to me, not to the book, not to the course, he's coming to me. So am I equipped with enough ways of thinking and treating to see a range of people? That question will exercise you from now till to the end of the course. There is no innovator who didn't fall into that trap, ever. So you have to take innovators with a grain of salt that they didn't quite remember to put on their innovations, and say, this apparently works well for some people. It's worth my learning it, it's not worth my stooping it on everybody. Yeah, it's work. Now the question is on who, and that we need a whole lot of tools to be able to sort out. Because if you take Rabbi Tal's question and say, well, I don't want to work that way, and then you say, well, this family apparently did want to work that way. In other words, this family that worked well, and maybe something else wouldn't have worked so well. So then maybe I need to learn how to do this. And then Rabbi Tal and probably 90% of you are saying, but I don't want to learn how to do that. You know, that's not your question. You do want to learn how to do it. Oh, okay, so we're in good business. But do I want to learn to direct people? Do I want to learn how to say, your kid is afraid of dogs, here's what to do, bing, bing, bing. Now, Haley left out a lot of the process of it. In other words, in the 10 sessions, there are all sorts of interesting conversations which were not interesting to him to record. And that's always the case with innovators, that they're minded to what's new, and they leave out what they think is just the same old, just talking to people. But just talking to people is what we're always doing, and then the question is how we focus it, or how we direct it. So, so that's enough on that, right? Yeah, Debbie.
A question about that, about this type of 10-session thing, which is, does it stick? People don't change in 10 weeks and then boom, they're done for their.
Right. Well, one of the things that therapists always ask themselves, and if you remember Harash Bisasson, he asked himself that, he said, when is this over? Because I get the idea of when it starts. But when is it over? And how to define when it's over, and how you define when it's over for now, and maybe not for later, that's one of the things we're going to be working on. We need some tools to be able to think about it, but I'll give you a promo, because that's how the world works these days. You do with people what they can do now. That's not all of what happens, because therapy is not about fixing the phobia. That's part of therapy. Therapy is about how people grow, and how they grow more or less well, more or less in a healthy way, how they grow in a way that keeps their ability to grow together more robust. That doesn't happen just when you get rid of a phobia. See, Haley believed, and the word belief doesn't belong here. There are places where it belongs, but not here. He believed that once somebody's finished with their symptom, that's all therapy is about. And we want to learn how to think about that and to broaden that, so we can think about the symptom and even treat a symptom, but not only see the symptom and believe that that's all it's about. So the same thing with 10 sessions. Is it possible in 10 sessions to make some movement and some change in certain things? Undoubtedly. He's not lying to us. That's what happened. He didn't tell us what happened to his little Hans 18 years later. Freud did, right? But J. Haley didn't have that kind of patience, and we don't know what happened to that family afterwards. Some of you were saying, oh, big deal, so then his brother had OCD afterwards, and the symptom returned in the family. And some of you were saying, wow, that's amazing, the family made a major change. And one of the things we're going to look at that case again. We used it for multiple function. We're going to look at that case again and ask, what was the change? And how do we define change? Fast change, slow change, or role in change? That's something that we're going to be working on. And so if there are no other questions, let's start working on it. Today we're doing the longer trek, and next week we do the shorter trek, and then we do an exercise. That's how we're doing it. Long and then short plus exercise. So get ready, or take out your pillows and have a refreshing class. One of the things that we need to figure out when talking about family therapy is how people interact, which means how people essentially create their worlds together. You see, the assumption once upon a time was that there's me in the world, and the world interacts with me, and it is the way it is, and I do with it what I do with it. That way of looking at things changed in the 20th century. We don't have any philosophers here. We have any people that studied philosophy? Oh, a little? Okay. So those of you who have heard the name Husserl, we won't mention Heidegger, but Husserl, know that in the 20th century, the way that we think about how we work with the world changed. And instead of looking at me and the world, we began to look at an evolving process. That evolving process of how things seem and how I take them and how they then seem and then how I take them and how they then seem, that's what's called phenomenology. That was 10 seconds on phenomenology. We're going to see an application of that in the area of families in an article which, as soon as I can get you a reasonable copy of it, we'll put it up on the site. My copy is not good, but I will be getting a good copy. And this was a paper called The Patent of Concrete Experience. Concrete experience is a notion that's embedded in phenomenology. Nobody talked about concrete experience before the 20th century. And here we have one of probably the greatest American developmental psychologist, Sybil Escalona. Anybody heard of her? I was privileged to be her student, and she put up this very important paper that said the following, that what is the world? The world is not the baby experiences the world directly. The baby and the world together create what's called the pattern of concrete experience. So the baby is part, the baby or people, but let's talk about baby. The baby is part of creating a world of concrete experience. Now, we happen to have two sisters in our class, so one of the interesting things that shows up when you look at sibling research is that people don't live in the same family. In other words, the experience that one child has of the family and the experience that another child has of the family are not identical, even if they're twins. Trust me, I'm a twin. Anybody else here a twin? That's it, just me? Okay. So, and when you look at it, you say, well, how is that possible? It's the same mother, the same father, same stuff. How is it possible that the experience could be different? And the answer is that I create with the environment something different than somebody else. In other words, a child who's, let's say, more active and a child who's more passive will have a different family because they will evoke and create together with the family. The active baby may be very good for activating a mother who's a little passive, and the active baby may be not so great at overactivating a mother who's irritable. And a quiet baby may be very good at calming a mother who's a bit irritable, and a calm baby may really get the worst end of it with a depressed mother who needs an activating baby to keep her going. So you see that who the mother is and who the baby is create a concrete pattern of experience. The baby is part of it. So we are part of creating our world together. That's not hard to understand, right, Daniel?
So I get that the experience is formed by the relationship, but is concrete experience, is that perceived experience? Like concrete experience, isn't that somewhat different based on
are you a philosopher too? That's a philosophical, it's a good question. You know, what comes before what? I don't know. It all, you know, by the time you see it, it's already a certain, remember we talked about cause and effect and linear thinking. By the time you see it, it's a circle. You know, so it's interesting to think about what comes first, but things happen to the way that we can understand them pretty much simultaneously. In other words, the baby doesn't have, let's say, a half an hour to be just the baby and then the mother interacts with him. The baby is in the world, cries, is held, nursed, and is nursed in a certain way. New mothers know this, and if you've had more than one, so this one nursed this way, and this one nursed the other way, And like what came before what? Like this is a baby who, for the rest of his life, is going to go at the world the way he went at his first nursing. And another child is going to go at the world the same way they went at their first nursing. People have that experience. So that creates a pattern of concrete experience with the mother who says, Gewalt, aren't you hungry? Or why are you so hungry? Or so forth. So it'll depend on where the mother is at, how the mother interacts, and fathers too, right? So the pattern of concrete experience is what we have. See, that's that. Why did I suspect you're a philosopher? Because that's exactly the question that Husserl was trying to free us from, is what is that objective experience before experience? The answer is there isn't any objective experience before experience. There's no such thing as objective. It's always intersubjective. It's always things that we're doing together. So that's the concrete experience. And what predicts the outcome, the developmental outcome, is the concrete experience. In other words, you can't take the baby and say, this baby is going to have this developmental outcome. The question is what pattern of concrete experience that baby creates together with its family. And what I was telling you about in terms of the developmental outcomes is the result of a wonderful book that Sybil Escalona wrote on individuality, where she showed that there's no such thing. In other words, that it depends if the baby is active or not active and how it interacts with the mother. What pattern of concrete experience is created. If it works well, the developmental outcome will be good. In other words, a baby who's quiet and it works well in the family, the developmental outcome will be good. If the baby is quiet and the home is depressed, then the developmental outcome, this is research, will not be good. If the baby is active and the family is chaotic, that child is not going to have a good developmental outcome. If the baby is very active and the family needs that activation and it works well, that predicts the developmental outcome. So you don't have the environment directly affecting the baby, you don't have the baby directly affecting the environment. They co-create, we could use that term, we're going to get to it later today. They co-create a concrete experience, and that, when you see a family in the room, that's what you're seeing. You're seeing the concrete experience of this family. Yeah.
So the experiences have to be...
Ali, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm learning. Okay. Yeah.
So the experiences have to be opposite. Like, does the baby, in order for it to work, does the baby have to be opposite the family, or it doesn't matter as long as it works?
Right. See, and behind most questions, the question is, does it need to be opposites in order to work, or can it be something else, whatever? And behind that question, there's an answer, and the answer is, the way you ask the question, you know the answer. It is what it is. Yeah, in other words, have to be is way beyond our scope of science. We don't know what has to be. But if you look at it and say it's working, then you say, I could reflect on how it's working. I won't really know, but I can reflect on it, and particularly if something is working with a mother and one child, you can say, how can I use that to help the mother and another child to work better? Like, what is the bad fit and how can they overcome it? So, but when the family comes in, and the truth is, when the family comes in, you look at them. Haley looked at them, but he didn't say it. He didn't say, what is the pattern of concrete experience in the family of little Hans? He didn't say that, right? But it was right under his nose. That's what he was dealing with, right? He just wanted to do it in a more linear way and to control it, but it's there. And when you see an individual client, guess where you're going to see the pattern of concrete experience? That's what's called transference, right? Transference means that the pattern of concrete experience that the client is used to creating, he's going to recreate with his therapist. And that's wonderful, because then you get to find out what it is. You're part of it.
Always?
And the answer to always is never. Always, don't say always, right? Yeah. Not always, but put it this way. I'm just talking to this class. What?
I'm saying the idea of therapy is that you create a safe environment and a different kind of an environment where you're able to, right, open up and feel safe.
Right. Right, okay, well, we have to disabuse ourselves from a certain notion, which is that maybe the baby, from the minute that the baby starts breathing, is involved in creating a concrete experience with its mother, but not in the therapy room. The therapy room is free of that? It's not free of it. The question is how much it intrudes into it, right? In other words, people come in with their pattern of experience, and guess what? So does the therapist, right? And then we make an effort to sort of dispel most of it, to be able to try to see something that works in a different way. But when we're creating a safe environment, who's creating the safe environment? We are. In other words, not the therapist, not the client and the therapist. Well, how do we know how to do that? And the answer is we bring in our concrete experiences and make something work in a different way. But if the room is safe, disabuse yourself of the notion that the therapist makes it safe. We do very little. We help the client to make us into somebody who can be experienced as safe. You see how it works? In other words, it's a concrete experience which one side can't create. We co-create it. So does that make sense to you? It makes life a little harder, but more interesting. In other words, a client comes in and you say it's working, so you could say, that's because I'm a great therapist. Or you can say, because something about me and this other human being are creating a pattern of experience that's safe. That means that I must have had some experience of safety, and so must have the client, and we're meeting at that point. And we're using those experiences to create a certain pattern here. Why is that useful? Because it doesn't always work, right? Because, you know, some of you have already had the experience of a client who drives you crazy from the minute they walk in because they want something you don't know, and they say, well, why are you sitting that way and why are you looking at me that way? And so we're going to be co-creating a pattern of experience about paranoia, about intrusion, about something or other, which if I can understand it, I must have had something like that. Because if I hadn't had something like it, I can't understand it. Right? So now we get into a muddle, and then what do? As therapists, we say, let's step off the stage and look at this together. Or at least, let me get out of here and talk to my supervisor and look at it, you know, with my supervisor. But the idea is that something is always happening between, right? Something is always happening between. And the objective idea that I can just sit and watch it because it's objectively there, that's what this young lady Dora taught Freud doesn't happen. How did she teach him that? She fell in love with him, right? That's what happens sometimes in therapy. And then you say, I'm sitting behind you, you're lying on the couch and talking. What are you talking about? And Dora said, about my pattern of concrete experience, and you are part of it, right? Freud said, wait a minute. How could I be part of it? That's not my intention. And then, being Sigmund Freud, he said, she's probably right. That's what therapists do. There's probably something there I haven't seen. And I guess I'm contributing too. If I learn what I'm contributing to it, I can learn a lot about her patterns of experience in her family, her other figures. That's what's called transference and counter-transference, right? That we go on stage, we do something that's familiar to each of us, and then we reflect on it. When do we reflect on it? Oh, every second? Not possible. Every 20 minutes? Closer to possible. Every couple of sessions? More likely. So that's what supervision is about, right? To try to figure out what's going on between us, not just what this person is about, what's going on between us. And so when you do family therapy, the between us is in the room. That's the advantage of family therapy. That's what makes it difficult and very challenging, but very useful, because it's not so much between me and them, because they're doing their own thing. Yeah?
So, if I understand correctly, if I do notice a transference going on in the sessions that I've been having, that means I'm missing something.
That means you're what?
That I'm missing something, I was overlooking something, because there must be something going on, according to what you're saying.
According to what I said, there's always something going on. That's correct.
No,
right?
in terms of transference, in terms of like using the relationship between
Well, the question is whether it's useful or not. In other words, to know that something exists and to make use of it are different issues. In other words, things are going on which you can understand according to our last odyssey of the last two sessions. in at least 8 different ways, right? There's lots of things going on, right? And if you take me and my 8 different ways, and that's 8 by 8. That's a lot of things going on. It's hard to see 64 things simultaneously. Well, you can usually see like 1.5. And if you want to sell a concept, don't go past 2. If you get a concept that has 3 parts, it won't sell. It will live forever, but it won't sell. That's just economic advice to you. Be simple if you want to sell. But something's always going on. Now, how do you use it, right? So Freud said, all patients love their therapists. That's what's called positive transference, right? In other words, there's something in concrete experience of a person who felt safe and nurtured, listened to, that's the basis of therapy. If they can't bring that to therapy, it's going to be hard to do at least psychoanalysis. So Freud said, so leave it alone. You leave it alone. You let it happen, and you let your clients feel good with you because they need that until it goes sour. So in psychoanalysis, when you have to see the same person 6 hours a week, it goes sour. And if you see somebody once a week, not necessarily, but every day, so it goes sour, and somebody says, you are not listening to me, and you're trying to force me into this or that. And of course, if you can say to yourself, I don't think I am, the first question you say is, are they right? Always the first question. But let's say you say, I think that's coming from over there. So then you can say, well, that's a negative transference. You see, then it's getting in the way. And so then we have to use that as a drama and try to understand it, to get off the stage and take a look together and say what was going on. That's the Freudian way of using transference. It's very different from what we do when we see people once a week. But it's not a different way of thinking. It's a different way of using it. There is another way of looking at it, which is that whenever there's anything, a client says, comes in and feels comfortable, and say, why do you feel comfortable here? Well, that's what they do in Argentina. Anybody here from Argentina? Where Melanie Klein's way of thinking was dominant. Kleinians say there's always transference and you always have to interpret it. Positive, negative, it's always a distraction. Freudians don't think so. You can already hear what I think, but certainly when we're doing therapy that's much more diluted, it's not useful to tell people, if you're thinking well of me, there's something the matter with you. That's not so useful. Anyway, so you get the idea that the concrete experience creates a developmental outcome, or you could say client and therapist, or therapist and client, depends on who you want to be the baby. Client and therapist create a concrete experience, and the therapeutic outcome is part of the concrete experience of the therapy. Okay, now, just one last thing, which is, what about this? Can the environment ever directly affect the developmental outcome? Can the environment do something, skip over the baby, doesn't matter who you are, have a direct effect on developmental outcome? And the answer is, that's what we call trauma. That's what we call trauma. Why? Because trauma skips over my experience. The experience of trauma is that I'm not there. I'm not thinking about it, I'm not reflecting, I don't have language, I wasn't able to prepare for it. I can't do anything except suffer it. That's the definition of trauma. There, the environment is creating a direct development outcome. That's not a desirable thing. And what do we do when we treat trauma? We go back and make it into a concrete experience that happens to a person who can use it and not just be overwhelmed by it. You had a question?
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying about trauma that create a direct developmental outcome. But at the end of the day, the same trauma will affect different people differently.
Correct.
So the person does have something to do with it.
This is when, when you put another few years, you'll be giving lectures too. This is a moment of nachas, right? Said, oh, somebody was listening and said that was too general. Absolutely, you're right. In other words, the question was, but environment will affect developmental outcome differently for different people. So it's not exactly if the baby's not there, right? That's correct. Different babies will have different experiences with trauma. But all of trauma will be with us. What's common to trauma is that I wasn't there. I wasn't participating in it. But what it does to you will be different. I live in the South, and all of the kids in the South, from one missile attack or another missile attack or this or that, they're all some sort of post-trauma, and but they're different. They're different. Okay, so now, yeah.
But isn't that what behaviorists believe?
Say that again?
Isn't that what behaviorists believe about the environment? That in order to create a different developmental outcome, it's all about manipulating the environment?
What do behaviorists believe? You see, one part is very important. Behaviorists do indeed believe. You got that right? Behaviorists, one of the problems in talking with behaviorists is like the Dharma Hashiv Lapikoris. I mean, they have this belief. Do behaviorists actually skip over the experience? Well, that's why behavioral therapy became cognitive behavioral therapy, because it was doing this, and that didn't make sense because there were like people there. So cognitive behavioral therapy tries to put in the cognition of the person as part of creating a cognition with a concrete experience. So you're right, that's a development. And then you say, well, cognition is part of the baby, but we just made it a 4x2 chart of stuff other than cognition. And the answer is, if you do CBT, you believe a little broader, but you believe. So it's always, there's something to it. If you say to yourself, well, who does that work for? Obviously it works for some people. And then you would ask the question that we asked about Jay Haley, who believed, right? Which is, for whom is that useful? At what junctures? And as what part of what can be an overall therapy? If you believe, you say it's good for everybody at all times, and that's a complete and exhaustive therapy. That's a belief. Right? But to say there's a useful thing there that people do, what can I learn from it and how can I use it? That's not a belief. That's something that a therapist would say responsibly, it could be useful at times. Right. Okay. Now, we're going to have a look at something that's going to look a little bit too complicated, but it really is about a 6-month-old smiling at her mother. So, we want to bring it down to simple things. What we're looking at, did anybody have a chance to look at the reading for this week? Well, yeah. Oh, okay. One more hand, and I'll say Al Hanisim here. The person who wrote this book is named Daniel Stern. Zal. He died prematurely just a few years ago. Daniel Stern was one of the great innovators in child development in the end of the 20th century and into a decade of the 21st. He was one of the first people who used that. See, that came, I'm looking at you, that. The camera, the ability of looking at interactions on a video became available in the 50s and 60s. And so some people said, we ought to have, instead of talking about mothers, talking about how they think, what they feel, and what goes on, why don't we just look at it? Welcome. Why don't we just look at them? Why don't we take videotapes of babies and mothers and look, you can go by. And look at what goes on with them, but not in sections of like 2 or 3 sections. Let's have a look at it in parts of seconds and see what kind of eye contact they make and how they connect and how they don't connect. And one of the people who you've heard of who did that was Terry Brazelton. Is he still somebody that people read? Brazelton was in Boston, and Stern was in New York and then in Geneva. Do you need to move it further up? We found a new application for the mechitza. Okay, no, that's a useful application because the men are always too hot and the women too cold. So, or is it the other way? No. Well, okay. Anyway, it's an application. So.
I want to generalize here.
Thank you. When you find yourself lecturing, you will always need that correction, because if you have to generalize, but then you have to sort of land. So we're landing at the point where Daniel Stern was one of the first people in the 1960s, who took mothers and their babies, videotaped them, and did microanalysis. Microanalysis means, like every third second, if every third of a second, what's happening. So you could watch the eye contact and the dance that goes on, which usually goes too quickly and people don't notice it. And Stern summarized his work and other people's works in a very important book that came out in 1985. The chapter that you're reading is from that book. It's not an easy book. And the book is called something of the human infant.
Interpersonal world.
Interpersonal. Thank you very much. The interpersonal world of the human infant, and you see, when you use the word interpersonal, there's already a little hint there. Where does the word interpersonal come from? In America, it comes from Sullivan. Anybody ever hear of Sullivan? Okay, Harry Stack Sullivan was one of the few great innovators in American psychiatry who wasn't Jewish, and actually he was Irish, and he was also a little crazy. That often helped. Sullivan created the interpersonal school, and the interpersonal school was based on something that developed into Stern, and there was a lot there that wasn't in Freud. There was a lot in Freud that wasn't in Sullivan, but there's a lot in Sullivan that wasn't in Freud about the interaction between people. And so Stern was influenced by that, and he was trying to look at the interpersonal world, not the subjective world, not the objective world, but the interpersonal world, you see, the concrete experience of the human infant. What goes on between babies and mothers? And he developed the following way of looking at it, which we'll look at in some detail, but hopefully not excruciating detail. What he suggests, you see, you have the inner representation. We all live with inner representations, right? But those inner representations are always in the process of being moved around. There isn't a fixed inner representation. It's the inner representations are of what? Now, before Stern, the assumption was that the inner representation is of mother, right? Mother is out there, and I represent her inside. The word interpersonal is a marker. What he means to say is that you don't actually represent mother, you represent mother in interaction with me. In other words, there is no such thing as that objective mother. There's the mother that I experience as I'm influencing her, and she's influencing me in our concrete experience. So there's this world of concrete experience where there's an interactional experience. Baby and mother smile at each other. We'll do that instead of cry. And then there's this interactional experience. And then, you see, the child has already generalized previous representations. Now, what does that mean, that the child generalizes previous representation? You know how memory works? Memory used to be thought of as a database. In other words, you just gobbled up everything, and it was there, right? It turns out that memory doesn't work that way at all from the very beginning, that we are always editing our memories. We're always altering our memories, and so we're always generalizing from what we've actually experienced to something more general. One example of it is that if you show a baby a picture of, let's say, of two eyes, baby's seen the picture of two eyes. How do you know the baby recognizes it? This is the most important part of infant psychiatry. When infants recognize something, they get bored. And when they get bored, their pulse goes down. So when you show a baby something that's new, the pulse goes up, and when it's recognized, the pulse goes down. Some of you will have some concrete experience similar to that here in this room sometimes, right? So when you're checking your pulse, we try to sort of do something new every 4 or 5 minutes. What's that?
You've got a baby that sees something familiar.
What?
And it likes that something familiar, it gets very happy.
He gets very happy, but the pulse goes down. When baby recognizes something, the sign of recognition is the pulse goes down. You're adding to it aspects of emotion, but we're talking about things that are pretty boring anyway, right? So you show a baby a picture of two eyes, and he recognizes it. Pulse goes down. You show the baby a picture of a mouth, and he recognizes it, and the pulse goes down. You show it until the pulse goes down. Then you show him a picture of two eyes, a nose, and a mouth, which he hasn't seen yet. Now, obviously, he's seen it, but I'm just, trying to give you an example of it. He hasn't ever seen that, right? But he reacts to it as if he's seen it. In other words, he generalized from what he had been seeing to already having seen something he had never seen. That's what's called expectation. And so our memory is always a little bit behind and a little bit ahead. In other words, we're always generalizing. So as a result, when we look at the child's inner representation, he's just had this activity of smiling at mother, and that goes to the inner representation of the previous, we call this 7, the previous 6. Just, it could be 7,000, 6,999. It's easier to say 7 and 6. So the child has a generalization that he's created out of his concrete experience of interaction with mother up until now, right? Now we have this particular smiling episode. And between two human beings, the variables are so enormous that things just never repeat. They look a little bit alike, but they never actually repeat completely. So here we have an interactional experience, and it challenges the previous generalization. And then what the baby does is, out of the previous generalization, there's what's called the evoked companion. Now, one would call that the memory of mother. But why are we calling it the evoked companion? Because it's active. See, memory tends to be something that we think of as passive. It's just there. But the way the baby remembers mother is through the generalization of the previous interactions with mother. Interactions. The baby and the mother, not just the mother, the interactions. So the baby has what's called an evoked companion, which is how it is between me and mom up until now, which is not how it really was, but how I remember it, which includes my generalizations. And then, what does the baby do? The baby makes a comparison between the evoked companion and what's going on now. This is a slightly different smile. This smile is broader, the mother's chuckling in a different way, she's less robust. It's a different kind of a smile. So the baby is comparing what's going on now with what had been generalized about what had gone on before. Follow? And then, what does the baby do out of that? The baby creates a new generalization of inner representation. In other words, now I have, on top of what I had had up until now, something new, which goes into the pot, and then I stir it. I don't save them, in drawers. I stir the pot, and I create a new inner representation, generalized. So what we have of the generalization of 1 to 7 is different than the 1 to 6. And it's not 1 to 6 plus 7. It's 1 to 7. You take this, stir it into the pot, and now we have a new experience. We have a new inner representation. And then when we have activity number 8, so it'll be a different evoked companion. It'll be the evoked companion based on the generalization of the representations of 1 to 7, not 1 to 6. This is going too fast, but I'm looking for somebody who's looking like this, but I don't see that. We're all okay? Okay, this is the first time this...
Who's the doctor behind me? Which doctor was this?
What?
Who's the...
Daniel Stern. Daniel Stern. Wait, was it Yona, you had something to say? Gewalt. Something. What? Okay. Yeah, all right. So let's just go over it one more time. How about we go over it one more time. That will create your new generalization of what the hell is this guy talking about for this class. So, yeah.
So in trauma, is there like a pause, is there like a flashlight in one of those thing where you get stuck in that?
Hold on a minute. We'll get to that. We just want to go over it one more time, and then we'll ask those challenging questions, and that's a good one about trauma. So a baby generalizing from experiences. Experiences that are interactions with mom, right? So if I've had 6 interactions with mom up until now, I've created a generalization of those 6 interactions, which is not the same as each interaction in draws. It's a generalization. That generalization of those interactions, not of mom, but of interactions that I've had with mom, the concrete experience we've created together, that generalization I bring to a new experience with mom as what's called an evoked companion. The evoked companion is how I recall mom, but not how she was, how I recall her from the previous interactions. Now I have a new interaction. So the evoked companion of what I've made out of the experiences I've had with her up until now, I then compare with what's new in the new interaction, right? And then that goes into the pot. And I stir the pot, and as a result I have a new evoked companion, which is based on the generalization of the representations of 1 through 7. It isn't 1 through 6 plus another one. That would be just another draw. It's not done that way. I stir the pot, and I create a new generalization of 1 to 7, which I've created. It's not what it was, it's what I've created out of what there was, and that creates for the next interaction a different evoked companion, one that's slightly different that I've cooked up. You had a question. This is clear now?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
In other words, one negative experience with the mother is not going to cloud a generally positive. If the child's experiences with the mother are generally positive, and one time they whatever,
right,
it's not going to all of a sudden the baby's done. Like,
for some reason that comes from the left side of the room. The question is every mother's question a million times a day. Oh, what damage have I done now? Right? You know, because it ain't always perfect. So there's going to be an activity number 11 that's stop, right? Sit down, right? So then you say to yourself, oh, well, that's going into the pot, right? So now that's connected to Rabbi Tal's question about trauma. You see, if I'm doing something with it and I'm comparing it and I'm putting it into the pot, so now I've broadened the pot, and it includes mom who was a little irritable, right? But that doesn't change mom completely, and it's not like a separate memory of mom. It's a broadened memory of mom, right? And Rabbi Tal was asking a good question, which is, well, trauma doesn't get into the pot, does it? Right? In other words, trauma isn't something that I've done something with. So it apparently lives in a different place than the generalizations. And that is indeed a good question. It's not one I had thought of before, but it's a very good question. In other words, if I can't do anything with it, so it lives in what we call dissociation. And that's exactly how trauma lives. Trauma lives in some place that's dissociated, and I can't put it into the pot because it did something that I didn't interact with. The pot is the stuff that I've interacted with. It's like the generalization of concrete experiences that I'm able to do something with because I co-create the concrete experience. I don't co-create trauma, it happens to me.
That's if it's like a one-time trauma, but if it's
Right.
like a ongoing trauma, like
Right, so an abused child who's used to these bad experiences all the time is going to come into therapy expecting to be abused, right? And will go into class expecting to be abused and have interactions with other children expecting to be abused. So there what you have is both single trauma that is associated and a sort of a generalization, which the child, a negative generalization, but a generalization. That's correct. You know, what you do when things repeat themselves is you end up generalizing them and usually say, I'm being punished because I'm bad. But that'll be a generalization, and the evoked companion will be somebody who knows that I'm bad, can see right through to how I'm bad, and will sock it to me. And then you're going to have a challenging problem. And that's one of the problems you have with dealing with children who are abused. Allie?
I have a two-part question, if that's okay.
Sorry?
I have a two-part question, if that's okay.
Everybody agreed that we can have a two-part question? Okay.
Is this only with regards to the mother, or it could be anybody, like a sibling?
To Allie's, all the two-part questions, but they're really four-part questions. Because the first part has the answer, and the answer is, yes, you do. Obviously, this is not just mother. right? In other words, Stern was studying mothers because men who really liked the kuchimuchki with babies but had a PhD, the only thing they could do was to videotape the mothers and enjoy that. So he videotaped mothers, but it's all interactions, all interactions. I can hope that it even includes some grandparents. And the second part of your question.
The question is, in that case, I once had a client who was abused by her brother as a child, and when I asked her about how the relationship was now, she said that they're like the best of friends and like totally like amazing. Like, how is that possible then, given this?
Okay, so now there, that is a two-part question. Because the first question is this graph going to give you answers to everything? And the answer is maybe not, right? But the question is, what do you do with that here? How did this girl who was abused by her brother end up being able to be friends? And the answer is one of two possibilities. One is the dissociation of the abuse, and so it's a friendship except for. And the other is that it was actually worked through. If it wasn't worked through...
Is it really possible?
Let's say, is it possible to work through?
I think that this is possible. I'm like finding this very hard to believe.
I mean, I saw.
Wait. What are you finding hard to believe? That they're good friends?
That they were,
Right.
the way that they're friends now.
Okay.
Finding that, like I can't even remember.
Okay. So, what, you know, Ali told the Baba Maisa, she said that this...
I don't think, I think
Right.
she's saying this.
No.
That's why I'm asking. It's like, if I'm.
Let me just tell you a little hint. When you hear something that you can't believe, pay attention to what's making you not believe it. Because when people say something, there's something to it. There's some kind of concrete experience. It doesn't make usual sense. So you see, your name is... Shana. Shana has a generalization of inner representations of what it would mean to be abused that doesn't include being friends. And so now we have this new activity that you're being, huh?
I don't think that was in the book.
What?
I don't think that was in the book.
Okay. No, it's more complex. But you see, cognitively, what you're saying is, I can't fit that in. Right? These days, I think you people say, I can't wrap my head around it. I'm trying to figure out how that works. But if you can't wrap your head around it, then first ask about your head. Right? In other words, first say, there's something there. Why is it hard to believe? It is hard to believe. Why is it hard to believe? And so, you see, I was skeptical too. I said there's two possibilities. One is that they worked it out together because siblings, among other things, also love each other and have a lot of experiences together and sometimes do awful things to each other, right? But the awful things they do to each other is usually like 2% of the time, 3% of the time. They're not always doing awful things, and there's a lot of other things going on too. So one possibility is that the basic positive part of experience allowed them to work through together the painful parts of it for both sides. Does that ever happen? Of course it does. That's part of what we try to do here, is to help people to heal. That's what healing is about. It's not about forgiving him without ever talking to him. It's about working out a relationship that's real, that includes that, recognizes the tragic part of it, but recreates something new. If that's never happened, then one suspects that it's dissociated. In other words, that there's a best friends that doesn't include, for example, some of you know from your neighbors' families, that some relationships don't include conflict. In other words, everything's happy, 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 because the only thing we ever do together is happy, happy, happy. And when there's conflict, we just duck it and get happy again. So it's possible that it's a relationship, and then if you would say, is that good or bad? The answer is it's human, and human things can't be good or bad, but it's maybe on the way. In other words, maybe it's a way of preserving something in order to make it possible to grow beyond it, and the question might be when. So if you have a client who says, you know, I was abused by my brother, but now we're happy, and you say to yourself, what's my role? Because she's telling me both of them, right? So she's telling me something complex. She's telling me that there's two different kinds of concrete experiences, and she's more or less saying that we keep them apart. And that's something you might say to her. You might say, it works best for you and for your brother to keep out of your relationship the stuff that's hard to work on. At some point, we might think about how we might address it, but that's not what you're here for now. Now you need to have the positive relationship to continue to live, but that's not the end of anything. It's because you've mentioned it, so it's here. Okay? So now, if we go back to the book and say, okay, so now if that's the case, what do we say about the inner representational world of ourselves as human beings? That's who we are, right? In other words, we say, when I say me, myself, what are we talking about? We usually mean the inner representational world. We usually mean how I think about things, what I remember about things. Me, right? That's the inner world of an individual. So if you look at it, you say, well, whoa, this inner world of the individual is not so separate from relationships, right? In other words, every relationship has been reconstructing the generalizations of who I am, right? So you could say to yourself, if you wanted to, that who I am is deeply influenced by, you could say, by mother, or to be more exact, by my interactions with mother. That's who I am, is always being recreated by my interactions with mother. Now that, believe it or not, needs a new term, which we'll get to in a minute. See, if we say this is the sense of self, and the pragmatic meanings are the interactions. How did we smile? That's a pragmatic meaning. It's something can be observed in the room. Remember pragmatic meanings? So subjective meanings are over here. You remember we did this last time? Subjective meanings are over here, inner representations. Pragmatic meanings are over here, what's really going on. And what's going on in the middle, right? What's going on in the middle is something that we would call, or the Stern called, a regulatory self-object. Now, this is an important term which appeared, created by Stern, and it wasn't created out of whole cloth. There was a, let's see, yeah, here you go, right. Anybody heard of Kohut, Heinz Kohut? Heinz Kohut was one of the most important psychoanalysts in America in the second half of the 20th century. Kohut was in Chicago, and worked his entire life on trying to figure out how you can stay an analyst, which is looking at the inner world, and pay attention to how people influence each other, right? And the way he did it was to create a term called the self-object. Now, that was a phenomenological innovation, because all of Western philosophy is about the self and the object. What goes on between the self and the object? How do I know the object exists? How do I know that I exist? And other such chokhmas. But there's no such thing as a self-object. But if you take phenomenology as a process of interaction with the world, where how it seems is always evolving by how I take it, and how I take it changes how it seems, so then you can get to the idea that the baby experiences the mother as part of his self. That's what a self-object is, that the baby experiences the mother as part of his self. And how did we just see that? We just saw that here, that the baby's sense of self, or the inner representations, are always being influenced by this self-object, the mother. Now, Stern referred to it as a regulatory self-object. What does that mean? It means that mother is regulating the baby. In what ways? The baby is hungry. The baby doesn't say, please feed me. He doesn't know he's hungry. I'm using he for the baby so we don't get mixed up with she the mother. If we wanted to do she the baby and he the father, it would be the same. So we've got past that question. And so baby is hungry. Mother wants baby to be satiated. So mother feeds baby. So she is regulating the baby's hunger. Where is the hunger? In the baby, right? The regulation of hunger is what we experience ultimately as part of myself. right? When I'm hungry, I do something about it. I experience hunger. But originally, the experience of hunger is regulated by a self-object, by mother who's experienced as part of myself. And what is she doing? She's regulating. Regulating hunger, regulating loneliness. You pick up the baby and hug them. What are you doing? You're regulating the affective experience. You're regulating the emotion. Mother intends to regulate the emotion. She brings for the baby a sense of comfort, and the baby experiences the comfort that mother brings as part of himself. I am comforted. Mother is a vehicle for me to be comforted. Mother is a vehicle for me to be comforted, right? Mother wants the baby to be interested in something, so she uses her finger, baby's let's say 6 months old, and shows the baby the ball and says, here, look at the ball, and the baby follows the finger. It's a regulation. And who is interested in the ball? The baby. So it's my interest, my inner self being regulated by mother. Mother wants the baby to be happy. She starts smiling at the baby, and the baby smiles back. We'll get to how that works later. Baby smiles back. Mother smiles at the baby smiles again. Suddenly the baby has the world's biggest smile, and dad comes and takes the picture. So whose smile is it? It's my smile. But who's been regulating it? Mom, right? So she's experiences what's called a self-object, and what she's doing is she's bringing me to experiences. She's a regulator of my inner experiences, right? I don't really care who she is. That's coming later. She's a regulator. That's why it's called a regulatory self-object. I experience her as bringing the world to me and regulating. Regulation is a popular term these days because everybody's talking about anything that moves being dysregulated, right? So mother is the original regulator, but regulation feels like a self experience, but the person who's doing it is the self object, okay? Now, just to, yeah.
Every other person to extend the regulatory self-object.
Say that again.
Every other person other than oneself is a regulatory self-object.
Does the self have things other than regulation? We'll get to that. This is a developmental step in the first year of life, where the other is experienced as a regulatory self-object. There are other things that go on, which we'll get to shortly. But I don't know if I get to your question, though.
Even as adults.
What?
Even as adults.
Even as adults.
Other people, there's a part of other person is just a regulatory self-object.
Right. So this is another moment of nachas, when you start to give lectures and somebody says as a question or as a comment what you thought you were going to get to in an hour. That's exactly right. In other words, the regulatory function is lifelong. We've been regulating each other the whole hour, better or for worse, but we've been regulating each other. Sometimes I want you to laugh so that you don't fall asleep. So I didn't, not you personally, but if you took it that way. So we've been regulating each other, and that's always part of human experience. That's what you're getting at. That you never are completely free of regulating, but if I were here with a guitar, there's no danger of that, and I was moving your emotions with music, we might say we're having a marvelous regulatory experience together. And that's where some of artistic experience fits. It's always there. But the question is, what else is there? You see, it's in some ways too good. It's in some ways too good. It feels like, well, we're just hanging out together, everything is fine. And then you would say, well, where does conflict come in, right? We'll get to that in a minute. But you're absolutely right. It's a lifelong function, yeah.
So the way we go back to memory and the way it works, building on each other. Right?
I have never had such good questions in this lecture. You're gonna get me addicted to this lecture. I'm not gonna go on. Yeah, memory. Yeah.
Okay. So the way that it works, like the mother, which is like the primary, caretaker, regulator of the baby, right?
Right.
That creates for them a sense of what does smiling mean, the experience of smiling and everything. So afterwards, when other people come into the picture, smiling builds on that memory of smiling.
Oh, so the question is, if mom is doing this regulating and smiling is mostly with mom, so where do other people fit in? And the answer is, the simple answer is, that's never been studied. Because people are addicted, it's never been studied. In other words, you're asking a question that would be nice to say, not only I know the answer, but why I know the answer, how I know the answer. And the answer is that we don't know the answer because these men are addicted to dyads. In other words, it's always all about mom and the baby. But we'll get to, in a second, there's also a little nachas. In the next slide, we're going to see where other people come in.
As looking at the baby that looks at the two eyes,
Yeah.
and gets bored and recognizes it. Maybe when he sees another smiling face, he realizes that's joy and that's good, just feels good when I see that.
Right. So that's what you do when you don't know. You suggest something plausible, right? That's plausible.
But isn't that all about broadening, like when you do therapy, right?
Yeah.
When you go, you don't go into happy things like smiling, you're going into, feelings that are not comfortable, like, and then you try to see, like, where else you're experiencing and everything. So that's why I'm asking that.
But so you're thinking about therapy what's troubling you?
Where it says is that why in therapy we're doing the broadening? Because
We're what?
we're doing therapy?
Yeah. No, say it again, I just didn't hear it.
Oh, okay. I'm saying in therapy, right, you go broadening, deepen, right? Like
Right.
more, right? So is that because of the way that the memory is that it builds on top of each other, and so like, it reminds you of like, everything, but the core of everything is the mother.
Right. So there's this question about, in therapy, when people have associations, that something reminds them of something else, how does that work? And the answer is nobody really knows. If you want to make a plausible suggestion, that's fine. But it's certainly the case. You see that when you're doing something that brings up, it's a plausible way of thinking. It's never been studied, as far as I know, but it's certainly true. You'll see in the room that something reminds somebody of something. And if you're doing therapy that's interested in that, not Haley's therapy, which was not interested in that, but if you're doing therapy which is interested, and you see somebody sort of just stop for a minute and their eyes usually go to the side if they're having an acoustic memory, or go up if they're having a visual memory, or go down if they're having a kinesthetic memory in their body.
That's
And
really true.
what?
Eyes moved.
Oh, this is just, one of these little tricks that was made up by NLP in the 70s, but it works pretty well. That when somebody's thinking about remembering something with words, it goes to the ears. When they're thinking about something visual, the eyes go up, and when they're feeling in the body, the eyes go down. And since we've backed into it, it's a useful way to think about what's primary in the way that your client experiences himself in the world. In other words, if your client's eyes are going up, you might say, oh, I see that you're having a memory. If your clients go to the side, you might say, I can hear something going on in there. And in other words, you want to adjust yourself to the primary aesthetic mode, sense of feeling that the client experiences. It makes things work better regulated. They feel more at home. If somebody's looking up and you say, I bet you're hearing something there, so you just lost it for no reason. You'll find yourselves adjusting to clients. You'll find that with some clients you'll say, oh, I see. And with some clients you'll say, oh, I can hear that. And with some clients you'll find yourself saying, that's a deep feeling, right? So now you know why, and now you know one of the tricks to, it's not all of therapy. In NLP it's like 3/4 of it, but it's part of it. Anyway, Kohat decided that there were self-objects not based on babies. Kohat was an adult analyst, and Kohat's intuition or experience with his clients was that they experienced him as the glue that held their self together. Now, that's not what Freud thought. Freud saw clients who held themselves together because they had their own glue. But some of Kohat's clients, when he said to them, I can see or hear or whatever, that you had a difficult experience with your father there. So in Freudian analysis, the client says, I'm really feeling nervous about that. And you say, oh, this is working well because he's experienced anxiety, so there's something important going on. You had to plug that in? Yeah. But Kohat's client said, where are we? Mr. A, you're resisting what I'm saying. You see, I said something and you're trying to get around it, and Mr. A said, I think I'm going to pass out. And Kohat said, passing out would be a way of avoiding something that's difficult, and Mr. A passed out. And when he came to, Kohat said, I think I made a mistake, and I think I need to apologize. Kohat began with an apology, something always worth learning. He said, I think I didn't realize that the way you experience me is like the glue for yourself. And when you felt criticized, you have a question.
How did Kohat get his clients to see him as the glue that holds them together, because Freud would get the glue, so his clients would get that?
Okay, how did Kohat, what was he doing? The truth is that he was missing the point. In other words, it looked after Kohat like a lot of clients needed that, and we were missing the point. In other words, he wasn't doing something particular that made the client act towards him that way. The client needed this kind of regulation, and he didn't understand that that was the case. Now, that wouldn't happen to you, Hannah, or to any of you here. I cheated, I looked at the picture. But for self-objects, it's important. That wouldn't happen to you because you would probably get it. Because the truth is, it's not so hard to get, right? How many of our clients come in and they need, Rogers called it, everybody knows Rogers, right? What's Rogers' idea? That, right? That if a client needs unconditional acceptance and respect, so that's what we do, right? So the only thing different between Kohat and Rogers is that Rogers had this somewhat more simplistic idea that if you give that, that's enough. Kohat had a more complex idea that you can give it, but it will never be enough, because what you need to do is to help the client to understand when it's not enough, right? And then that client will say to Rogers, goodbye. But the Kohat, he might say, what's going on? And you can say, well, we all need this kind of, mirroring. And when we're gifted, blessed to be able to receive it enough, we start to believe in it. That's called more or less inside of me. I kind of expect it. And if we're not, then we always are looking for it from the outside. And that makes life very difficult, right? Rogers doesn't say that. He thinks he can just add it in. Rogers was in his time. So, but you see the difference. You see, So Kohat, you're doing this all the time. When your clients come in and you're paying attention to them, listening to them, giving them respect, you're becoming a self-object. And that's one of the things you're doing, but it's not the only thing you're doing. Okay? Now, if we look at Stern's work, are we still okay for another 20 minutes or so, people? Nobody's plutzing? There's water for everybody if you need it. If your ears are... we started to look at the joint experience, which is concrete experience, and we had the baby's inner representations. But we forgot that there's also mother with her inner representations, right? So now, if we look at this chart, it's going to look really complicated. This we might call associations, because this was the interaction, right? So when the baby takes the interaction, goes back into the pot, takes the evoked companion, which we're now using the word meaning, right? The meaning of this interaction, but compare it with the other interactions and then go back into the pot and create something, a new generalization, right? Well, guess who else is doing that? Mom, right? Mom is also regulating herself as she's being a regulator, right? So mom is having an interaction with this baby, but mom has all kinds of family memories, of family meanings. Mom, and those of you with little kids, I think know that this is true, although maybe you weren't thinking about it, is that she has her generalized experiences with this baby, and she has it with herself, and she has it with her mother, and her mother may be right there, and she has it with her father, and she has it with the other children. So there's a whole set of possible meanings that mom is bringing to the interaction with this child. And I'll give you an example. If mom happens to have a 4-year-old at home who is just being diagnosed as maybe a little autistic, that's how they call it these days, and now she's smiling at her baby, she's not just smiling at her baby, she's saying, are you autistic or not? And so that's overburdening what's going on. Or if she's lost a baby, or if she lost a sibling, and so forth. So mom is a part of this interaction. She's not just committed to the baby. She's there with deep interactions, and with babies it's very deep. Things are stirring in her pot as well. And now, so we have 2 sets of inner representations, okay? So far, so good. That's in the book, okay? Now let's just look at one more thing. Who else might be around? We have this big complex set of pots, the meanings, but in addition, mom is living in the world. She's in a room, right? And in the room, there are maybe grandma who's saying, give me the baby already. Or, oh, it's so wonderful to see you with a baby. That's science fiction, but or I wish I had been like that with you. Where'd you get this from? Or and then there are the other siblings who are saying, kill the baby, kill the baby, kill the baby. Right? We talked about that last time. And then there are her siblings, and then there is dad. And dad just came home from work and said, you've had the baby with you all day long. I'm plutzing. Maybe you can give me a cup of coffee and then go back to this stuff. Or dad comes home and says, this is nachas. I come home from the world and I see this and my eyes light up. Now that's going to influence mom, isn't it? In other words, mom has all kinds of regulators, and how she is with this baby is going to be affected by her, what would you call this world? There's an easy word for it. It's called family, right? In other words, the way that mom is in the family dynamics, how things are going on in the family, we didn't just put into the pot mom, we put the whole family into the pot. Follow? In other words, here you can start to see why we're learning family therapy, because that's what goes into the pot. Mom isn't there by herself. If she's by herself, that has a sort of meaning. Why am I by myself? Where is he? Who disappeared on me? And if she's not by herself, who else is pulling on me? Who else is supporting me? Who else is celebrating me? And who else is criticizing me? And all of those interactions are going to be put into the pot of who is mom and how I interact. And where does that go? Into myself, right? So we're creating ourselves. You see how you can make that connection? Yeah. Right.
Maybe I missed this. Developmentally, what stage are we talking about?
What's that?
Developmentally, what stage is this?
We're talking about the first year of life. Yeah. When we're talking about the regulatory self-object, we're talking about the first year of life. We're heading towards the second year. We'll get there before we have practice. But we're talking about the first year of life. The regulatory function is primary. And as the regulatory function is primary, everything that's regulating the regulator goes into the generalizations and goes into who I feel I am, what evoked companions I get. And so, for example, if when Dad comes home, it gets better, that could happen, right? Then one of the representations that the child is stirring into the pot is, oh great, Dad's home, right? If Dad comes home and it gets worse because Mom gets stressed out, or because he stresses her out, or because his mother-in-law is there and they start to go at it, that happens in some families. So the child starts to have an inner experience of who I am, which is, let's hope Dad doesn't come home, or anxiety when somebody else comes in the room, which is going to be hard to explain or to remember, but it's part of the pot, because it's how the family is, not just how the mother is. How the mother is depends on how the family is, and how the mother is going to be, so the family gets internalized. People internalize their families as part of themselves. You can follow that? Okay, that was impossible to say in a useful way before Stern. I'll just tell you one last thing, which is that Stern and Kohut were two of the three foundations of the reworking of psychoanalysis and of psychotherapy in the late 1990s, which was dominated by women who had a different way of looking at things. Treatment tended to be dominated mostly by men or women who were thinking like men. When women allowed themselves to think like women in the 90s, two of the three major sources for the writing, for example, of Jessica Benjamin, I don't know if you've heard of her, were Kohut and Stern. And you can sort of see why. Because the way of thinking that comes out of it is much more interactional. In other words, that we create the world, we're part of the world around us then gets into it. It's all in one pot. This I think we've done enough with. The self-regulating other, I think I gave you these examples. You know, if you want a kid to get alert, let's say I want you to get alert. So this is what I do. Worked, didn't it? Right. So it's your question. It's a lifelong function. Peekaboo, and mutual smiles and cuddling, meanings, exploration, and so forth. Let's just go on. Here we go. Now here's a picture of a mother and a baby. Now this baby is dressed in a way that you can't tell exactly, and that's because this picture is in Edinburgh, in Scotland, and you know, men dress the way they dress in Scotland. So let's say it's a boy, and here's the mother, and this is a painting which I came across in the Royal Gallery in Edinburgh, where I was on a trip trying to regulate my son, and this spoke to me. This is the painting was painted in 1880. It's an impressionist painting. It's somebody named Orchardson, who no less than Manet had very good things to say about. Let's look at it a little closer. So here is the baby. Now you're used to the idea that mothers and babies are always looking into each other's eyes, right? But Orchardson had a look at this mother and baby differently. See, the mother is regulating the baby's interest. The baby's interested in the fan, which is like an extension of her finger. She's making him interested. She's regulating his interest. He seems to be happy. He's not looking at his mother. He's looking at the fan. So this we could call the realm of the hand. We could call it the hand, right? This the regulation function, and the regulation function is one where the other acts upon me. Mother says, look at the fan. She doesn't say, what do you want to look at? Think about what you're going to look at and I'll get it for you. Look at the fan. I brought you a fan. Look at the fan. She's regulating him. She's acting upon me, but the result is inside of me. Right? In other words, I feel that that's my interest in the fan. I'm looking at the fan. It's me that's interested in the fan. She's created it, she's intended it, and why does that work? Because that's what I need. because I'm a baby. I can't go get a fan. So in the first year, so in case you wanted to remember what it looks like, we're talking about babies. The mother works upon me, but the results are in myself. And one example would be security. When I don't feel secure, so we can't hug ourselves. We're created with this, the clavicle over here, and it makes it impossible to hug yourself. That's a good thing. So you need somebody else to hug you. So mom hugs the baby, and he feels security. She attends it, she creates it, but where is the security? In mom? Yeah, also, but in the baby. The baby experiences it as my security, created by mom. So far we're okay? Okay. This is a lifelong function, and in families, people continuously do regulation, and when your clients walk into the room, usually for the first somewhere between 1 and 20 minutes, you're doing more regulation than anything else. When you do child therapy, all child therapists once upon a time had milk and cookies in the room because children don't regulate themselves, so that was part of having the child feel comfortable. Some of your clients will want water, some of them will want coffee. Now, you're not allowed to make your clients coffee, and that's one of these rules that use your best judgment, because if that's what a client needs to be regulated, then make them coffee, right? Because if somebody's coming in exhausted and can't think, and a cup of coffee will make them, and they say, I want to be regulated, I want to be here, but I need a cup of coffee, well, why would you interpret that? Just give them the cup of coffee, and then you say to yourself and to them, wow, that was a useful thing for us to do, and now let's go on, from it. But the regulation is going on not only some of the time, most of the time, between people. Yeah.
Going back to the security, is that considered enmeshment when the mother is actually getting her sense of security when hugging a child?
Right.
When the mother's dependent on the child?
That's one thing that I was missing, and you added it. When Kohat said to Mr. A, you need me to feel attended to, you need as the glue, he said to himself, what you need to know is that another human being can understand that that's what you need from me, and I'm doing it because you need it for me. Parentheses, I'm not doing it because I need it from you. That's where your question is. And so where you get into some sort of a muddle, and it's a great challenge for parents of babies, is that it's great to have the baby hug you, right? And so you can use the baby to regulate yourself, and that's part of it, but not the primary part of it. In other words, the important part of being a regulator, it's a terrible responsibility to be a regulatory self-object, because it means that you're paying attention to what the baby needs from me, while in the meantime, this is great. So I'm easily falling into doing it because I like being a regulatory self-object, and then I miss the fact that I'm doing it more for me, and the baby says, leave me alone already. I got secured 10 minutes ago. Put me down, right? And that's a common experience, because that's something that you have to sort of co-regulate to figure out. But it's a very big issue for therapists, because none of us became therapists who didn't want to be, right? So there's something about the role of understanding that you have to ask yourself, what does this human being sitting with me need from me? And separate that what I need from him, which is, I would like to be a great therapist and have him walk out and say, wow, that was the best hour in the world, instead of saying, I don't know what happened, and I can't sleep tonight. And you say to them, part of the process, but when we meet next time, we'll understand it better. That may be what he needs, but we don't really like that. We say, calm down. Just because I said that doesn't mean that it's true. You didn't really want to kill your father. It's okay, honey. Just calm down. That would be for me, but that wouldn't be for him. Yeah.
Does the child not need the mother to have the child in some regulated object?
Just 1 second. I need a little bit more quiet to be able to hear you. What?
Does the child not need the mother to have the child as a self-regulatory object?
Yeah. Does the child What?
The child, not the mother, have the baby as a self-regulatory object. Is that not part of what the mother, is that not part of the child's experience of
That the mother...
Is it also a self-regulatory object?
Okay. Another moment. Yeah, the question, I think, was, this is kind of a cycle, isn't it? I mean, the child doesn't know that the mother also likes being a regulatory object, so why would the child not be aware of it? The answer is, yeah.
Not aware of it, but it's part of the connection.
Right.
Which makes...
Is it part of the connection? Of course. You know, mothers would like to feel that they're altruistic, but that's a big part of it, but not the whole story. It's great being a mother. And actually, children feel most secure when they feel that their mother loves being their mother. Doesn't just love them, loves being their mother. If you think about couples, right? So if the two don't love being each other's spouse, you're not going to be able to do couples therapy. They may be suffering terribly in it, but they don't just love each other, they love being the other one's spouse. So is that part of the experience? Yeah, I think so. Not in the book, so you just expanded it. And, that's a sign that we're thinking in the material. Yeah.
Isn't the negatives, the damaging side of that when a child, meaning that the child does understand, at maybe not at a year old, but at some point the child can understand that the parent needs something, because the child starts to give it, and that's where some of that damage comes in.
That's now the easy way to look at it is look at the way older siblings hug their babies, younger babies. Right? They love hugging the baby, but they're not able to quite get how much the baby's loving it or not. And usually you need, right? So that's a good example to see it. What happens if a mother wants to be a perfect mother, right? What happens if a mother wants to never have the baby cry, but not because the baby doesn't need to cry, but because the mother can't bear the fact that she feels like she's a bad mother if the baby's crying? Right? So we're going to have a perfect mother and a very disturbed baby, right? Because the baby is not getting what the baby needs. The baby is being used for what the mother needs. That's what's known as a narcissistic mother. It's a danger in the sense, you know, don't plus. There is no mother who isn't also that way, right? I mean, that's part of the deal. Otherwise, who can stay up all night with this, you know, screaming and whatever? So you need to have some of that. But the balance is usually, as I said, you know, the balance is that you adjust yourself and say, what does this baby need now? And if it suits my needs, that's fine. But if it doesn't, we're going to go first with what the baby needs. So that's what gives a baby security. But mothers, there are mothers who you'll see, and you'll see some clients who had mothers like that, who were so busy trying to be a perfect mother that they didn't see the baby at all, because there is no such thing as a perfect mother. You know the term, Winnicott, the third of the triad of rethinking of psychoanalysis was Daniel Stern, Kohut, and Winnicott. And Winnicott used to talk about a good enough mother. That's what he meant. Good enough is adjusted, regulated to what you need, not only to what I need, mainly to what you need, and getting it, right? And giving you what you need, but not more than that, because then you don't believe in yourself. Okay, let's see. There we go. So let's just take a look at some pictures, and then we'll give you a break. This is not from Edinburgh. This is from Paris. Anybody been in Paris recently? There's a small museum called the Cluny Museum, in Paris, and in the Cluny Museum, there's a set of tapestries from Belgium in the from the 1400s, and the tapestry shows a lady and a unicorn in interaction, and it's considered to be an allegory of the five senses. So, first of all, you can see it well enough. It's marvelous tapestries. I'll show you close-ups. Now here, she's feeding a bird some candy, so that's the sense of taste, right? And the unicorn isn't part of that particular interaction. And here, she's smelling a flower, so the sense of smell. And here, you can see what she's doing. Sense of hearing, playing the organ of the day. And here, the unicorn is involved, and Freudians would have a good time with it, but it's a sense of touch. And here, we have this vision. So now, you have this lady, and vision, and you have a mirror. So she's going to look in the mirror, right? Isn't she going to look in the mirror? That's why I ended up bringing these in. Why isn't she looking in the mirror? She's supposed to be looking in the mirror. But she's not. Actually, what she's doing is showing the unicorn what she's seeing, right? With some bit of a problem of perspective, but she's showing him what she sees through her eyes. So, how does that work? What does that tell us? Is she regulating the unicorn? She's doing something different, right? What she's doing is what's called the intersubjective. And I'll just tell you one baby story. Intersubjective, a bad word. Try to say it in Hebrew, hopeless, right? Intersubjectivity. But I call it the realm of the eye, based on this. Now, what do we mean? A baby story. We had the mother with her finger, the hand, she was the ball, so the baby is crawling, she shows him the ball. So a year later, the baby is pushing 2 now, and the ball is dirty, but it's still there, and she still has her finger, and he's still bothering her. And this particular story, she's looking out the window, because her mother-in-law is about to come, and there's this casserole in the freezer, which is going to go into the oven, and for shalom bayis, it's going to be a fresh casserole right out of the oven, but the timing is crucial. So she starts to see that the car is coming, and she has to get the casserole into the microwave, and the baby wants attention. So what do? You say, I got a finger, there's a ball, sweetheart, play with the ball, and leave me alone. I'm busy, with something more important. Play with the ball. The baby looks at the finger, looks at the ball while she's looking out the window, and the baby climbs up on the counter and looks out the window. Why is the baby looking out the window? What? Because she is. Right. Right, which means the baby is interested in not what she wants from him, but who she is. What are you doing? That's a subject, right? So the baby is looking to understand what is the mother's inner world. What are you seeing? I want to see what you're seeing, right? In this case, she's showing the baby the most important thing. The baby is the unicorn, which is how I see you, right? And the baby is interested in the mother now, not as a regulator. The baby doesn't have an answer. Regulations are answers. The baby has a question, which is what's going on? What are you looking at? What are you seeing? What's the world to you? Now, that means that the baby's first subject is the mother. Whoa, that just put things upside down. The first subject, the first understanding of subjectivity is the mother's subjectivity that she shares with the baby. He wants to see the world as she sees it. Share with me what it is to be a subject. If you share with me what it is to be a subject, I might just try it myself and try to be a subject. In other words, to understand that there's an inner world that can be communicated and shared. So that's why this is called intersubjectivity. It's not that there are 2 subjects and they're just communicating. You can do that on the phone. It's that one subject, the first subject for the baby, which is the mother, is creating a place for subjectivity in the baby. The baby gets the first subjectivity from mom and then shares it back. So that's what's called the intersubjective, guess what? Self-object. And that starts at about 18 months or so. It's a function of the second year and so. Yeah, Johnny.
So was that the goal?
Say what?
Is that what the goal was when the baby was younger? The mother was looking at the ball and wanting to create the girls, the kids that mom wants to give her.
Right, Yoni's asking a very useful way to divide it. So where was the ball the first time round? The ball the first time round was what the mother wanted the baby to look at, not what the mother was interested in. The baby wasn't interested in knowing whether the mother was interested in the ball. The baby understood that the mother was helping him to be interested in the ball, right? He wasn't interested in whether she was interested. Now, you might be just asking a good question, which is, how do you know that, right? So the way to know it is to read the book and see how people know these things. But it's obviously not discrete. It's not as if there's no subject, there's only regulation, and then it becomes all intersubjective. That isn't the way it happens. One overlaps the other. So the question is, what's dominant? In other words, could it be that the baby is interested in the ball because the mother is interested in the ball? Right. Well, she's providing effective regulation to him. She's suggesting that the ball is fun and interesting. But does the baby know it in the first year that she is interested in the ball? If you look at the way babies are able to understand mother, that's not the issue. The issue is what she's doing for me, not who she is. But in the second year, the question becomes who she is. Can she share with me who she is? Does her sharing with me who she is help me to be able to become a subject? Okay?